Ambassador Carpenter, thank you so much for speaking with VOA.
My pleasure.
The United States is lifting a ban for Ukraine to use American weapons to strike at military targets across the border in Russia. Could you provide details about the shift in this policy? What is allowed and what are the limitations?
Sure. So this is in the context of the Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region against Ukraine. Russians were striking targets in Ukraine from just across the border. And at that point, the Ukrainians came to us with a request to use U.S.-provided weapons to be able to hit back at the Russian weapons that were targeting Ukrainian villages and Ukrainian people and their homes. And so the president directed his national security team to look into this and directed them to change the guidance and to allow for the employment of U.S.-provided weapons to be able to strike back. That guidance has now gone into effect. Again, this was at the direction of the president, and it was in the context of these weapon systems that were being fired across the border.
So, Ambassador, does it apply only to Kharkiv region? If Russians, let's say, will try to do the same or use the same tactic against Sumy region, would Ukrainians be able to strike back across the border as well?
So this applies to counter fire capabilities that are deployed just across the border. It does not apply to ATACMS or long-range strikes. This is meant to enable Ukrainians to defend themselves against what would otherwise be a Russian sanctuary across the border.
So if it's, let's say, a Sumy region, would it be possible to use those?
As I said, this applies to enable Ukrainians to defend themselves, yes, across the border for Russian attacks that are coming across that would otherwise, where Russians would enjoy a relative sanctuary on their side of the border. And it's just yet another manifestation of President Biden's leadership on this issue, his determination to support Ukraine and to allow Ukrainians to defend their towns, their homes, their villages, their cities against what has been a brutal Russian aggression over these last 2.5 years.
What influenced administration decision to make a shift in this policy?
So, as I said earlier, this is coming in the context of the Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region, where the Ukrainian side came to us and requested to be able to use American-provided weapons against Russian fires from the Russian side of the border. And the president immediately, as I said, directed his national security team to take this up.
You were in Ukraine not so long ago and you saw the situation firsthand. How does the administration, what is the hope of the administration on how this policy shift might influence Ukraine's position on a battlefield?
Well, we have all along wanted to give Ukraine the capabilities that it needs defensively to push back on this aggressive onslaught on their territory, and we will continue to do that.
There is a lot of criticism about Western support for Ukraine being rather reactive. So when something happens, it, if I may say, unlock some new capability. With this reverse in a policy, should we expect that now American support would be more proactive?
So, look, President Biden has led a coalition of more than 50 countries to unlock as many defensive capabilities for Ukraine as possible. The so-called Ramstein Group, or what is known formally as the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, is convened at President Biden's direction by the Secretary of Defense of the United States to find every capability that we could possibly surge to Ukraine to enable it to defend itself. Ukraine has an Article 51 obligation and right under the UN Charter to defend itself against this aggression. And we have spared no effort to provide, if I'm not mistaken now, over $81 billion of support to Ukraine since the start of this war, $51 billion of that being military support.
Do you expect, though, still that, this change in policy might also influence the situation in a battlefield and Ukraine might have an upper hand in coming months?
We endeavor to give Ukraine the capabilities over time to enable Ukraine to be able to defend its sovereignty against this aggression. And yes, the types of weapon systems and the capabilities that we have provided, yes, those have changed over time. The battlefield has changed over time, and we have reacted to what Russia has done. Don't forget that Russia has also benefited from its partners, principally Iran and North Korea, and we have therefore stepped up the contributions that we have made together with our allies and partners, and we continue to do so. Every day, every week, we're looking at how we can find more air defense systems in particular, but I would say across the board, all types of defensive capabilities so that Ukraine has the wherewithal to defend against this aggression.
How about air defenses? Because a couple weeks ago, we heard from Secretary Austin that United States is talking to allies in Europe to try to get at least one more Patriot battery. How about the United States? Should we expect another battery from the United States as well?
We are looking very carefully at what we could contribute to Ukraine's air defense needs, which are very acute at this point in time. We're talking with allies and partners. We're talking around the world with various countries that we engage in. And I don't have any announcements to make today, but I can assure you that this is an ongoing process where we are doing everything possible to unlock air defense capabilities for Ukraine. We understand that oftentimes these assaults are brutal. Oftentimes they take place on urban concentrated areas like Kharkiv, like Odessa, like Dnipro, and like other cities in Ukraine. And we would do everything possible to provide that air defense coverage to mitigate the risk.
I would like to talk about the NATO summit that will happen in July in D.C. And Secretary Blinken this week in Europe, he said that we'll see very strong deliverables for Ukraine at the NATO summit in Washington. Is there a consensus among allies about what those deliverables might look like? And should we expect the actual invitation to start accession talks?
So Secretary Blinken is in Prague right now to talk about the nature of the deliverable for Ukraine, the nature of the support that will be provided in the aftermath of the Washington summit. We think it's going to be very robust. This will be essentially a bridge to membership so that when Ukraine does in the future receive an invitation, now there is no consensus for an invitation now at the Washington summit. But when conditions permit and when there is that consensus and Ukraine does gain entry to the NATO alliance, we want to make sure that Ukraine is fully capable on day one of being able to deter and defend, and also is fully interoperable with NATO and is able to essentially participate in all the benefits, but also undertake the responsibilities of being a member of the alliance from day one. So we're looking out to build out those capabilities and that support through this package of measures that is currently under discussion among NATO allies in Prague as we speak right now.
But we shouldn't expect the invitation to start accession talks, right?
As I said, right now there is not consensus among the 32 allies for an invitation.
Should we expect the signing of U.S.-Ukraine bilateral security agreement before NATO summit?
So we are engaged in discussions with our Ukrainian partners on this. We're making progress, but I don't have anything to announce for you right now.
Today, President Biden is meeting with Prime Minister of Belgium, De Croo, at the White House. What role does President Biden hope that Belgium can play in using Russian frozen assets to Ukraine's benefit?
Well, we're looking forward to hosting Prime Minister De Croo later this afternoon, as you mentioned, here at the White House. Belgium is a great NATO ally. They're a member of the EU. They've had the presidency of the European Union. They play a very important role. And President Biden, as he does with every single European leader, will underscore our partnership in support of Ukraine. Now, Belgium plays a particular role in terms of Russian sovereign assets, and we will be discussing how we can use the proceeds from those immobilized Russian sovereign assets to support Ukraine.
It seems like President Biden is likely to skip the Ukraine Peace Summit that's going to be happening in Switzerland. Is it a sign that administration does not believe that this summit can produce some important results? Or is it more of a sign of election year when the administration focus might be shifting more towards domestic policy rather than foreign issues?
So first of all, I don't have an announcement for you today on who will participate for the United States. We will have senior level participation there, no doubt. But I also want to remind that President Biden has been the leader essentially of the free world in galvanizing support for Ukraine over these last 2.5 years. As I mentioned, he raises the issue of Ukraine with each and every European leader. We have led the United States, we have led in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in mobilizing defense capabilities for Ukraine's effort to defend itself on the battlefield. So we have done a lot. As I mentioned, $81 billion in support since February of 2022, and $51 billion of that in terms of military support. That will continue. But we will look to use the opportunity of this Swiss Peace Summit to underscore support for Ukraine, for its sovereignty, for its territorial integrity, for the principles of the UN Charter, and as wide a participation as possible that will attend will underscore worldwide support for Ukraine, again, in its effort to defend itself.
Ambassador Carpenter, thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.